Now, in the words of party leader Micheál Martin, Fianna Fáil's election manifesto makes no new spending promises. It does promise, however, a new type of politics to be as serious as the issues we must overcome. Well, to discuss some of its contents, we are joined by outgoing Junior Minister, Laois Offaly TD, John Moloney. John, you're very welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Will.
Why on earth should the Irish people trust your party to run this country after it was Fianna Fáil that led us into this mess in the first place?
I think, first of all, Fianna Fáil going out there in the hustings and canvassing is making that very point, that we have the experience, we have the ability to deal with the huge economic difficulties before us. And in fact, we can also add to the whole notion of changing the political system. We have been there. We know what it's about. We know what change is needed. But also...
Yes, but let's look at your record. 400,000 plus people out of work, a budget deficit of €17 billion, spiralling national debt, and an insolvent banking system that threatens the very solvency of the state. So if that's not a mess, what is?
Yes, but also make the point to you, Will, that there's very few economies in Europe or indeed the Western world having similar difficulties, and they're trying to get on as well. No point looking back, it's a matter of moving forward.
Come on, difficulties to the same extent as Ireland.
No, not in some areas, not as much, but I have to make also the point that the new leader, Micheál Martin, is going out there public to say how he'll bring about that reform. And I think we've all agreed it's not politics as usual, it's politics for change. And we must put this before the Irish people to know how they would gauge the various manifestos. There's full weeks again to test each detail in it, and that's what it's about. And I think the reforms he's proposed are worthwhile considering.
Yes, and we will look forward in a moment, but the question of trust has to be dealt with. The adjustment from 2008 to 2014, according to your plan, will be €30 billion. So that's how far adrift Fianna Fáil led Ireland from a sustainable position.
Fianna Fáil in government, the same as many European governments, have had the very same pressures and huge difficulties. I just noticed recently the British budget, clearly a huge deficit, and more importantly, along with our own government, bringing in huge reductions in public spending and indeed in welfare cuts, education, health across the board. We're no different. Clearly, as a smaller economy, dependent upon our own resources and investment from abroad, we're feeling the brunt far greater.
Yes, but you concede on page 28 that significant increases in spending on public services and welfare were implemented on the basis of revenue projections, which proved to be entirely inaccurate. The tax base was narrowed too significantly. If that's not the fault of Fianna Fáil, who is to blame?
No, but Will, let's be clear about this. As we went into the last general election campaign back in 2007, all of the parties contesting for government at that point had much the same projections regarding growth. Our figures are based on that level of economic growth, as were the opposition parties. We were no different.
Does that make it forgivable?
No, it doesn't make it forgivable, not for a second. It makes the point that we are all taking the same advices, both economically and from banks, and indeed from world economic leaders as well. But the issue here is, you're asking, can we be trusted? The point would be, here's a party that clearly over the last number of months, or in fact over the last 2 years, quite obviously has had huge economic policies to pursue, most unpopular, and yet we're a party who want to be part of the next administration to try to work our way out of this economic difficulty we have.
Yes, but part of that assurance and trust must be the security of knowing that these mistakes will not be repeated. And another point you concede is that there was a failing of oversight in the banking system. Now, can you name one person who has been held to account for their failings in oversight?
Not so far, I can't, but let me make this, that the regulator acting independently, and again, I'm not going to just use that excuse to say the government should also have been, as it were, taking stock of the regulator's position, but a government depended upon an independent regulator. That's what we were, and we acted accordingly. Now, quite obviously, if the government, on the other hand, was interfering in the day-to-day work of the regulator, there'd be another allegation in that regard, but it gets away from the net point you have posed to me. We're about to try to bring about change in the political system. We are acknowledging the mistakes we have made.
Okay, but 2.5 years following the bank guarantee scheme, nobody, not one individual, has been held to account for that failing in oversight under a Fianna Fáil administration.
Not as
so in
yet,
2.5 years,
yes,
you couldn't do it. What makes you so sure you can do it in
I'm
future?
confident in the knowledge, that's just not me saying this. I'm confident in the knowledge of hearing the Garda Commissioner recently making the point very public publicly on national television that many of the files regarding the bank difficulties were with the Garda Commissioner and were from there going to the DPP. I think that's a very important step in the process. And I know out there canvassing people make the very same point to me. But it's not a matter of just putting people in handcuffs, as it were, to prove that we're about our business.
Well, they can do it in America and they can do it quite quickly, but we seem to have an incapacity to do it here.
Well, without giving a glib response, the American economy has been trifled with for many, many years, over generations. We've seen this back in 1922. We haven't had the same exposure as we've had in this country. So quite obviously this is a new phenomenon here, and we're dealing with that new phenomenon.
Let's look at some of your proposals then. Spending on social welfare will fall by €1.9 billion. That's a further fall in addition to what happened in 2011. Now, if that was taken from rates alone, then the average payment would hover at about €170 per week. Is there nowhere else you can find that money?
Regrettably, there's not. And we make that very point that as soon as the national finances are restored, that the cuts we make in welfare will be our first priority. We've said it time and again at the various budget proposals as well. Unfortunately, there's not. We've taken huge unpopular decisions in this area.
Okay, well, let's take a statistic from Bank of Ireland, which calculated that the top 1% of the population in this country holds 20% of the wealth. Now, if you take Sinn Féin, for argument's sake, they propose a wealth tax on assets above €1 million. Agricultural land will be excluded. They reckon that would raise €1.6 billion annually. Why can't Fianna Fáil tax the rich to this extent?
Well, first of all, I'm not too sure how the figures are right, as you just said there, but we have looked at, first of all, the whole notion of trying to generate economic growth. We're obviously concerned regarding taxing the rich, and as by way of, when I say taxing the rich, I'm talking about people who are generating wealth creation and job creation, and by way of that we are suggesting that a reduction across the board in every sector is the way forward, rather than be targeting in full one sector.
Okay, so this top 1% holding 20% of the wealth should continue to do so without handing over any extra portion of it?
No, not saying continue to do so without handing any extra portion, making the point that they will be also part of reductions.
Okay, well, how would you propose to tax or collect some revenue for the state from this vast amount of wealth that a tiny population holds?
Well, that may come forward in some form of a property tax, not by way of the resident of their own residence as well, but property. No, but
this is excluding property. This figure of 1% of the population holding 20% of the wealth, that excludes property.
Yeah, and I'm also making the point by all of incomes to the top 1%. But again, I don't have the detail of that.
Right,
but
so you don't have any ideas on that point at the moment?
No, I don't, but it's also fair to say, nor has my party either made that point. But tomorrow, or I think maybe today, when the party leader, Minister Lenihan, come forward to bring a proposal, they'll deal with that particular aspect. Okay,
let's go back to this €1.9 billion figure taken from social welfare. Accepting that's a big figure then, let's look at a significantly smaller sum. €7 million. €7 million is all you can find to help redundant apprentices get on job training. It'll help less than 1,000 of them. Is there no money that can be diverted from elsewhere to help more of those people?
Well, I don't think so. I think it's fair to make the point that when you read the manifesto in detail, we talk not just confining ourselves to one aspect, we also talk about helping individuals with education and training opportunities. I think it's also important to make the point that there's a suite of issues here regarding aid to businesses that have the capacity for innovation and growth. And again, there's a whole list of areas by way we're talking about promoting the country's position.
Okay, can you give us some ideas from your manifesto that are fresh and new that we haven't heard before?
Well, I think it's very important, first of all, to realise that we're basing our way of creating jobs and the very fact we have the youngest population in Europe. Very important to also make the point of the highest proportion of graduates amongst the 25 to 34 age group. And we're talking in terms of increasing further the foreign direct investment in this country. We're also talking about aids to existing businesses by way of maybe tax reliefs or some other benefits.